Welcome to the HobbySchool podcast. Whether you're a seasoned hobbyist or just getting started, HobbySchool is the perfect place to learn something new. My name is Dr. Destiny Kopp, and I'm your host of the podcast. But before we jump into our episode for today, the only thing I ask is that if you enjoy the episode, please share with a friend and give us an honest review on your favorite podcast platform. This helps us get out the content to more people. I also want to invite you to get on our wait list for our next Hobby School Online Learning Summit. These are free to attend, and you can find the link to join at hobbyschool.com, which is also in our podcast show notes. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. And my special guest today is Jessica Ays. Jessica is the designer behind Double the Stitches. She offers clear and easy to follow instructions, meaning more time enjoying your yarn and less time deciphering directions. You'll find stitch by stitch tutorial videos for uncommon techniques in her patterns, project based workshops so you can dive deeper into different topics. Jessica, I am super excited to chat with you today. Like I said before we were recording, I know absolutely nothing about knitting. I have never knitted anything in my life, so I have a ton of questions for you. But before we get started, can you tell the good audience just a little bit more about you and how you help people?
I would love to. I'm so honored to be here, Destiny. Thank you for having me. It's such a treat to have an opportunity to chat with you and to share a little bit about me with your audience, too. So, hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. As Destiny said, my name is Jessica Ays, and I am the designer and everything else at this point behind Double the Stitches. And it's a brand that started out very differently than what it is now. I started out knitting props for newborn photographers and selling my finished knits. And I got so very quickly burnt out creating the same thing over and over. And I knew there had to be a different way. There had to be something else to keep that spark and all of that alive. And so I pivoted to designing knitting patterns. At the time, I was also working in a local yarn store and I was teaching new crafters how to knit, how to crochet and all of that. And I would scribble on a piece of paper directions to knit their first blanket after they learned the basic stitches, the knit stitch and the purl stitch. They wanted to know, what could we create with this? So I was scribbling, over and over the same pattern that was in my head on scrap paper to give them. And the yarn store owner said, This is silly, Jessica." She said, "Type it up, turn it into something polished, something professional, and you can sell it. And then you have the option, you can gift it to your students, your in-person students if you choose, or anyone else. But at least it's out there and it's something real. And you don't have to go through this process of, reinventing it every single time that you go to jot it down for your students." And so that was what set me on my journey to creating knitting patterns. That was January 2020, not knowing what was going to come next in our world. And the timing just worked out nicely because I was then home with my children, was able to be there for them, to support them and all of that. And then I pivoted into teaching workshops because one of the things that I missed from working in the yarn store was that ability to share my knowledge, to share my love for knitting, to share that moment with someone where they are struggling and then suddenly, finally, something clicks and they get it. And that spark of understanding, of, absorbing that knowledge and being able to apply it for future projects was something that was missing. And so I found that through virtual online workshops. And so I've taught live workshops, I have on demand workshops. So you can learn at your own pace. You can learn, you can go back and rewind and fast forward. If I'm too slow, you can speed me up. If I'm too fast, you can slow me down, and you can, learn along with me, because I really do believe that everyone deserves that joy and fulfillment that comes from crafting, that comes from knitting. And so my mission is to take this timeless craft and make it more accessible and more attainable for knitters of all skill levels. And I want to empower you to explore the world of knitting with confidence, with joy. And I want to provide the resources that you need to succeed whenever you need them. And that's the beauty of the knitting patterns that you can work on, from the comfort of your couch or your favorite cozy spot in the house. And also the workshops that teach you the techniques that take you by the hand and lead you from never having tried it to feeling comfortable, maybe not mastery. I like to say, and I learned this outlook from my son's teacher when he was in first grade. And she said that practice does not make perfection, practice makes progress. And so that is how I try to live my life, and how I try to, imbue that with my students, to share that outlook with them. That, we forget, I think, as adults, what it's really like to try something for the first time, to not be good at something. We're not good at that as grown-ups. We're used to, we know how to walk, we know how to drive, we know how to cook, we know how to bake, we know how to do all of these things. But since we pick up these hobbies and these crafts, and we feel intimidated by them, or we feel like we'll never be good at it. But you're not necessarily good at something the first time you try it. You have to keep at it, stick with it, and keep trying, and that's what gives you the progress and towards perfection. But nobody's really perfect, right?
For sure, and I can tell you that I'm certainly not.
Yeah.
But Jessica, thank you for so much for sharing that inspiring story with us. And I love the quote that you're giving us, which is practice makes progress. And I love that. Love that story. Now, I have gone to your website and I have seen all of these, beautiful creations that people can make using your patterns and, with your workshops and all that good stuff. And I'm so very interested in that and kind of dipping my toes in that. I think one I saw was like a toboggan and then some like shawl wraps, and they were just so, so beautiful. If somebody like me who has never done this before in their entire life, where would you suggest I get started if I kind of just wanted to dip my toes into knitting just to see if I like it?
Just to see if you like it. So a lot of instructors will have a student start with a big project, and that's not always the best thing. I like to start with small projects because it gives you that sense of completion, of success, of starting and finishing something. If you cast on, and which is putting the stitches on the needle to begin knitting, and you go to knit a scarf or a blanket as your very first project, you are going to be frustrated, you're going to be bored, you're not going to see an end in sight, and you may not even get to the point of finishing. I'll tell a quick story. It was that my mom is not really a super crafty person, but when she was, young and married, just recently married, and she was commuting on the bus, and it was like an hour each way, and someone that was also taking that same ride with her was knitting, and she was interested in the idea of it. And so they brought her yarn, and they brought her needles, and they showed her how to start the project. And she was going to make a scarf for my dad. And so she knit the whole scarf and she kept going. And then the person wasn't on the bus for a while. And so she just kept knitting and knitting and adding more yarn and adding more yarn. And then she had this like 9-foot scarf because she was waiting for someone to show her how to finish it, how to end it off. And she didn't know what to do. So she just kept going. So I don't want anyone to knit a 9-foot scarf. Fingerless mitts are one of my favorite projects because you can knit a small rectangle and sew it up on the side. And that gives you the ability to learn a few different stitches. And it gives you the ability to put the stitches on the needle to practice for a few inches, 5, 6, 7 inches or so, and then to learn how to end it. And then the best thing about that is then you have to make the other one. So you get to reinforce those skills and start over to make sure that you remember, how do you put the stitches on the needle? How do you knit the different stitches in the pattern? How do you end it off? And there is a great free pattern out there. I'll share the link. It's not one of my patterns, but it's one that I use often in my teaching. And that's a great place to start.
I love that. So a fingerless mitten is what you're
Mm,
describing to me. I don't
yeah.
know that I've ever seen one, but I think I've seen, like, the fingerless gloves, but you're saying a fingerless mitten would be
Well,
easier to start with.
same thing. I
Okay.
just used the word mitten, but yeah, no fingers. So it's a rectangle that with has an opening. So you sew it up along the thumb side, so it has an opening for the thumb and then one opening for the other fingers.
I love that. I love that. So let's say there's somebody just a little bit farther along. Maybe they've kind of dabbled in it, or maybe they did it when they were younger and they want to get back into it. What would you suggest for them?
So the one thing I want to mention, and I found this so often when I was working in the yarn shop, especially, is that a lot of people learned maybe at their grandmother's knee when they were 7 or 8 years old. They needed to keep them busy and out of trouble, and they learned to, to knit from someone in their life. And then they put it down and they hadn't touched it for many, many years. We had a lot of people that would come into the store when I worked there that were, recently retired. And now they had all of this time and they were looking for a hobby. So what could they do? So they came in wanting to learn to knit. And they said, "Oh, I haven't touched the yarn and the needles for so many years and I'm gonna be terrible at this." And so we would sit down with them, we'd give them the yarn and the needles, and their hands just knew what to do. It's like riding a bicycle. So if you haven't done it for a while, but you did it as a child, I think that you'll be surprised. You may need a little practice as far as, how to tension the yarn to keep it even and all of that. But the skill is really baked in there like riding a bike. And that muscle memory is such a wonderful thing that we don't realize that we have. And for a next project, if you are comfortable with those basic stitches, the knits and the purls, I really think that the world kind of is your oyster as long as you have some tutorials or some support to back you up. And I think that a hat is a next great project because at that point, you can then learn how to do some shaping. So if you start at the bottom of the hat and then you need to make fewer stitches to decrease your stitches to work the top of the hat, that's another new skill that you're learning. And it's a great way also to learn how, instead of knitting on straight needles, you can also add in the skill of working in the round without any seams.
I love that. So we all have that muscle memory in us. So if we've done it before, we're going to remember. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about, yeah, this applies to so many things, whether it's like playing tennis or riding a bike, like you mentioned, or playing golf and doing all those things that we may have done or done as a child and we're wanting to pick it up as as an adult. So let me ask you this. What mistakes do you see people making, or are there mistakes that they make when they're knitting? And what would you suggest they do?
One mistake I feel that people make often is being intimidated, I think. There's a lot of I was telling you before we joined everyone for the podcast, but there's some gatekeeping in some industries, some crafts. Knitting is one of them, where someone who tried something once and found it a little bit difficult tells a newer knitter, "Oh, you could never do that. You're too new." And I really do believe that anyone can really knit anything with a little bit of support, a little bit of guidance, a little bit of help. The most empowering thing that I really have learned is how to fix my own knitting mistakes. And those are things like dropping my stitches off the needle, making a stitch that leans in the wrong direction or an incorrect stitch. And those are, I do a workshop for that called the Oops, Fix Your Own Knitting Mistakes. And that guides you through how step by step how to fix some of those most common mistakes. And that takes a lot of the fear out of learning a new skill. If you can go back and you can fix something that went wrong, then that helps you feel more confident in yourself and in your skills. And there is that fear. People tend to be terrified or hate the idea of having to rip out their work when they've made a mistake. And that's the beautiful thing about knitting is that if with a little bit of guidance and if you know how, you don't actually have to, if you make a mistake, you can actually undo stitches in part of your project, go back down, fix that mistake and work back up so that you are now at the even row with all the other stitches on your needle. And then you can just keep going with your project from there.
Oh, I love that. So, if I understand you correctly, and like I said, I know nothing about this. Even in if you're at even to the end of a project and you see something that you're not quite happy with and you wanna go back and fix it, it's easy to go back and fix it and just it doesn't mess up your entire project.
It is possible. If you're at the very end of a big project, like say a blanket, it might be a little bit difficult. And depending on the stitches, something that is, an intricate lace pattern might be a little bit harder to do that with. But I had a student of mine, her name is Sally, and she had been knitting this beautiful cabled sweater for her granddaughter. And it was supposed to be a birthday gift for her granddaughter. And she found that it had cables, on the body of the sweater, and then it had cables on the sleeve. And she found on one of the sleeves that one of the cables went in the wrong direction. Cables, they'll lean left and they'll lean right. And she made a mistake on one of the sleeves, like halfway, like by the elbow. And she was so upset because her granddaughter's birthday was coming up that week. And then she took my Oops, Fix Your Mistakes class, and she was able to undo the sleeve from the cuff all the way to the elbow and fix that cable. And she was able to give her granddaughter the custom handmade cabled sweater in time on her birthday. So that's one of my success stories.
I love that story. I love the feel good stories. And I want to go back to that gatekeeping comment that you made. And I've gone to your website, like I said, and I saw some and they look like intricate designs to me, like a shawl, and it was cute, absolutely beautiful there. Would you say that anybody with practice and really, if they were determined, they could knit about anything that you have on your website?
I think so, with a little bit of support along the way. The thing about knitting is that most of the stitches really do come just from the two basic stitches of a knit stitch and a purl stitch. So one makes like a V and one makes a bump, and then putting the yarn over the needle without a stitch, and that creates, it's called a yarn over, and that makes a hole in your knitting. So even the most intricate lace patterns are really a foundation of understanding your knit stitch and your purl stitch, and placing those yarn overs, instead of mistakes, placing the holes in the right places to create the beautiful designs. And I really do try. I have different levels of patterns, of course, but I do try to only create things that I think others will enjoy the process of knitting. And I try to create things where often you can use one ball of yarn, or you can keep going and you can customize it a little bit and make it, say, for a shawl example, you can make a little small shawl, or you can keep going and make something much more generous in size that, wraps around you and all of that. So I try to build that in. The other thing that I do is, not all of my patterns, but some of my patterns, I have been working towards adding accessibility to them, meaning that they are accessible for those with low vision. So often I'll have the, pretty PDF download with the pictures and all of that. And I try to keep my font sizes, kind of on the larger side, say a 12 point instead of maybe a 9 that's point font that you might find in a magazine. But I also create with a lot of my patterns a second additional PDF, and those are accessible for those with low vision. They can be read out loud to you using a screen reader. There are fancy softwares out there, but you can even use Adobe Acrobat Reader, and you can have it read it to you page by page. And so if you know the stitches, but you're just struggling to know what the pattern is telling you to do, you can actually have something as simple and free as Adobe Acrobat read the pattern to you. I have knitters in my community who are not at that point where they need something read to them, but as we all get older, our things get a little smaller on the page, right?
Well, I
Uh,
definitely can relate to that.
so
So
those are, instead of a 12-point font, they're, a 22 point or 24. So it's many multiple pages. But some people prefer, that, and not having to struggle with what does that say. I was giving my son cough medicine the other day, and I couldn't believe how small it seemed that the font had gotten on the label.
I know I always have my kids, "Can you read this medicine bottle?" Because I can't read how much I'm supposed to give you.
Yes. Yeah. Someone said the secret to that is using your phone to take a picture and then you can zoom in.
That's a really good tip. I'm gonna have to try that next time. Now, Jessica, I want to get into a little bit more detail about your resources, your Facebook group, and everything else. But before I do that, do you have any last minute tips for the audience?
Be brave. Give it a try. The worst that happens is that you have to start over. And that means that you get more time with your yarn. So, we're so afraid of making mistakes. And that, I mean, I guess echoes a little bit of what I was saying before, but I find so many knitters are, spend more time worrying than they need to. And so give it a try. Trust the pattern, trust the instructions. All of my patterns, after I write them, they go through a whole review process. So they go to a technical editor who goes through and makes sure that what I've written makes sense. She then goes through and she checks all of the math to make sure that everything adds up, that the maths, as we like to say. And then they're tested by other knitters of varying levels of skills to make sure that, maybe there's a sentence that I put in there that maybe didn't make wasn't crystal clear to them. So I like to have others review the pattern before I put it out into the world so that I can catch those things before to make that knitting experience more generous. I'm sorry, not more generous, to make it more enjoyable, to make your knitting experience more enjoyable. And my other tip is that if you're trying to make sure that something fits, you want to measure something called gauge, and that tells you how many stitches are in each inch. Typically, in a pattern, it will tell you how many stitches are over 4 inches. And if you're trying to make a hat or you're trying to make a sweater or any other type of wearable item and you want it to fit the intended person, you want to make sure that your numbers are matching the numbers in the pattern so that it will turn out as something that fits. I've seen knitters make hats that we then turned into a bowl. We turned it upside down because there was no head in existence that was that size.
Mhm.
So
Those are
it's
some
worth that time.
Yeah, so those are some great tips and motivation for us. I want to let folks know where they can find you. I know you have a Facebook group and you also have a free gift for them also. So can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Absolutely. So the free gifts, I actually have 2 gifts for you, and, Destiny's gonna share the link to that in the show notes, I believe.
Yes, I
So as
will
a
for sure.
Yeah. So, as a thank you for joining me for this, listening to the podcast, and for being part of Destiny's wonderful community, I have 2 free printable gifts for you to help you simplify your knitting life. So, one of them is what I call project tracker cards. And they print 4 to a page and you can cut them out and they help you make notes that you can put in your bag with your yarn and your needles so you remember who you were knitting it for and what size it was. And whoops, you need more yarn, but what color were you using or what dye lot were you using? So those are for you. I believe there's a page for knitting and for crochet, but the real difference is just whether it says needle size or yarn hook, but the general information is transferable across both crafts, and they have saved me personally countless times. I know that they'll do the same for you. And it just helps sometimes you pull your needles out of a project to go work on something else that maybe has a more pressing time frame. And then you forget what needle size or hook size you were using in that project in that bag that you put aside. So this will help you be able to get back to your project and not worry that something's going to be off. And then the other special gift that I have for you is printable gift tags that you can use for your handmade gifts. And those are not just for holidays, but it can be for, a birthday or just a special way to say to someone that you care about that you're thinking of them. So you can let them know also on that tag, there's a place to include how to care for your work of art so that it won't get accidentally ruined in the laundry. There's, care instructions depending on whether your yarn is acrylic or wool or cotton. And those will be on the label of your yarn bowl. So you can share that with your gift recipient there. So you can go to that link that you'll find in the show notes and just add your name and your email address, and those gifts will be on their way to you.
And Jessica, too, you have a Facebook group where you have your community just absolutely loves you. They've, been together for a while. They support each other. I'm going to also put that link in the show notes too. I encourage everybody to connect with Jessica, get on her email list. She sells knitting patterns. She has double the stitches pattern club. You have a lot of resources available for people who want to either dip their toes into knitting or really just take their skills to the next level. Well,
Absolutely.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today and all of the wonderful tips that you shared with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Destiny. It was really lovely to get to chat with you. And I can't wait to invite some of your audience into my Facebook community. As you mentioned, it is ever growing. We're at over 4,500 members right now in the group. And I was just asking them this morning, what do you love about the group? And they said it's like a warm, welcoming family, and everyone is so patient and kind. It's my favorite little corner of the Yarny internet. So I'd love to have you join there. And I also have my Stitch Society membership. If you are looking for more support and more of a tight knit community, we get together on Zoom twice a month. You get access to all my patterns and workshops, and all of that is included in membership. So I'll share that link with you all as well.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Destiny.
Thank you so much for listening today. Don't forget to sign up for the waitlist so you'll be the first to know when our next free Hobby School online learning summit launches. The link is in the show notes for this episode, or you can go to hobbyschool.com, and that's Hobby School with school without an H in it. Talk soon.